I want to just talk a little bit about Joe Biden saying, this is the worst thing since the Civil War. Everything is the worst. Have you noticed that? It's never the best. When we had Trump in, it's like the best in history. Now, everything is the worst in history. The January 6th, it's never been like this. We've never had attacks on the Capitol like this. Well, except for the bomb exploding in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., that caused an estimated $300,000 in damage. A group calling itself the Weather Underground claimed credit for the bombing, which was done in protest of the ongoing U.S.-supported Laos invasion. Oh, how many of us remember the Laos invasion and how important that was. The so-called Weathermen were a radical faction of the Students for Democratic Society. The Weathermen advocated violent means to transform American society. The philosophical foundations of the Weathermen were Marxist in nature. They believed that a militant struggle was the key to striking out against the state to build a revolutionary consciousness among the young, particularly the white working class. Their primary tool to achieving these ends were arson and bombing. By the way, they also bombed the Long Island courthouse, the New York Police Department headquarters, the Pentagon, and the State Department. Don't worry. That was happening in the 80s, but who can even remember that far back? I know I can't. It's the worst since the Civil War. And let me tell you something. By the way, somebody else went into the Capitol and burned it down. It was called the War of 1812. So I just want to let you know that.
When did that happen?
I'm not sure. I don't have the dates exactly, but look it up. It's somewhere in the War of 1812. Let me also just give you another time that we had real violence in Washington, D.C., and that is when Preston Brooks, you probably don't remember him. I looked him up today. I just wanted to make sure. I had a hard time finding out what party he belonged to. But he was an American politician and a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. He came from South Carolina, and he was a strong advocate of slavery and state rights. So I just assumed. I later found out, he was a Democrat. Total surprise to me. Total surprise. An outlier back then. But he was an advocate of slavery and state rights. He's remembered for his 1856 attack on the abolitionist, the guy who was trying to stand up against slavery, and Republican Senator Charles Sumner. Nearly beat him to death. I don't need to go on to that story. I've told you that story a million times, but it is that story that led him and led us into the election of 1860 with Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, a few black people were elected to Congress. In fact, the first black man, Hiram Rhodes Revels, he arrived in the Capitol to take his seat as the first black member of the U.S. Congress in 1870. But the Democrats tried to block him from taking his seat. And they said, Constitution requires senators to hold citizenship for at least 9 years. And he just became a citizen in 1866 with the Civil Rights Act and 14th Amendment. Before that, he wasn't a citizen. He wasn't even a human. You know what I'm saying? That was the argument the Democrats made to try to stop the first black man ever elected to Congress. Now, it didn't go well, and there were a lot of black people that were elected. I just want to give a little history lesson here. A lot of black people were elected. This is a poster that was out in the South. It says, what happened when the Republican Party was in power in Alabama? The above is a photograph of the Alabama legislature of 1872 when the Republican Party was in power of Alabama. The Negroes in the above picture were members of the legislature. I like the last one. If you believe in white supremacy, vote the straight Democratic ticket on November 6th. Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. Now, I'm going someplace. Oh, my gosh, they've changed since then. Have they? Have they? Have they? So this is a poster for the Democrats. And Joe Biden was going on and on and on and on and on and on about how this is Jim Crow on steroids. So you know what the Republicans are standing for is in many ways more opportunity to vote than anyone ever has had legally in the United States. Just not all the crazy crap that they said, oh, we're just doing this because of COVID. Yeah, that's what they're standing against. All right. But that is Jim Crow on steroids. Mr. President, I think you need an education on what Jim Crow was, what the Jim Crow laws did. You see, before Jim Crow laws were enacted in the South, blacks were being elected. Then what happened was there was this shortage of black people in Congress. It was so weird. It was weird. In fact, George White had been the only African-American member of Congress since Reconstruction when he delivered this address. And I want you to hear what he said. This is his farewell address from Congress. Now, Reconstruction happened. Blacks are populating all of the state legislatures. They're in Congress. They're in the Senate. And then after Reconstruction and the Democrats take over, they start little games. Let me just say, I want to enter a plea for the colored man, the colored woman, the colored boy, and the colored girl of this country. This is a direct quote from the farewell address of George White. I would thus not digress from the question at issue and detain the House in a discussion of interest of this particular people at this time, but for the constant and persistent efforts of certain gentlemen upon this floor to mold and rivet public sentiment against us as a people, and to lose no opportunity to hold up the unfortunate few who commit crimes and depredations and lead lives of infamy and shame, as other races do, as fair specimens of the representatives of the entire colored race. So what is he saying here? He's saying, how dare you? Some members of Congress are actually holding up a few crazies and a few people who have done wrong and done things illegally and said that's the entire race. So that was what the Democrats were doing. Now, they're not doing anything like that right now, are they? They're not taking a few people who have broken the law or done things and then said that's the entire race. They haven't done that, have they? They're completely different. They've completely changed. In the catalog of members of Congress in this House, perhaps none have been more persistent in their determination to bring the black man into disrepute and with labored effort to show that he was unworthy of the right of citizenship than my colleague from, what a surprise, North Carolina. During the first session of this Congress, while the constitutional amendment was pending in North Carolina, he labored long and hard to show that the white race was at all times and in all circumstances superior to the Negro by inheritance, if not otherwise, and the excuse for his party supporting that amendment, which has since been adopted. So let me just say this. In the town where this young gentleman was born, the general election last August for the adoption of the constitutional amendment and the general election for the state and county officers, Scotland Neck had a registered white vote of 395, most of whom, of course, were Democrats, and a registered colored vote of 534, virtually, if not all, whom were Republicans, and they voted. When the count was announced, however, there were 831 Democrats to 75 Republicans. But in the town of Halifax, the same county, the result was much more pronounced. In that town, the registered Republican vote was only 345, and the total registered vote of the township was 539. But when the count was announced, it stood 990 Democrats to 41 Republicans. Isn't that weird? Have things changed? Have the Democrats changed? By the way, I want to be very clear. What Jim Crow Act did was take anyone who was black and make it impossible for them to win in an election in the South. And they did little things first. These are receipts. If you happen to be watching The Blaze, these are receipts from a poll tax. This is 1932, 1931, 1930, receipts for a poll tax. So you had to pay to be able to vote. That, of course, is unconstitutional. That was the Democratic Party that did that. And then you have this. This is the election ballot for the town of Geneva in Alabama in 1932. And this was really great because blacks could vote. We're not saying blacks can't vote. What are you talking about? Of course they can. Except this ballot is the official primary election, the Democratic white primary. Only whites could participate in the primary. And, you know, all those Democrats, they love them some black people. And so there never seemed to be a black person on the ballot in the primary. But go ahead and vote for whoever you want, you know, in the general. You can do that. All of these were ruled unconstitutional. That is Jim Crow. That's what Jim Crow did. That's why we had this amazing explosion of people who were slaves and then educated themselves enough to be more well-educated, more well-spoken than I or anybody. I mean, that's easy, but anybody else, anybody that you know, go try to read some of their speeches. They educated themselves. They brought themselves up. And who stopped it? It was the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party, they changed. They changed. Oh, I want to talk to you about that change because there are things going on that African Americans need to wake up to. You're being lied to over and over and over again, and you're falling for the same trap. And so are many Americans that are not black. Wake up. Wake up. So Lyndon B Johnson, who was just a great guy, gutted the 57 Civil Rights Act, you know, made sure that it didn't have any voting restrictions. It made sure that nothing was happening with voting because, he said in 1957, this is unconstitutional. You can't tell local communities what to do. That was the Democratic argument at the time. See, they've played both sides. You can't do that. That's not what the Republicans were suggesting. They were just suggesting that we, keep up with the Bill of Rights and the amendments to the Constitution, that you can't block anyone from voting who is an American citizen and registered to vote. But then he had a change of heart. Now, the press goes on to say that Lyndon B Johnson only said these things because he was trying to get his Southern brethren on. But he had a change of heart. Remember, he's one of the most racist guys and absolutely against. I mean, he told his driver at one point, he said, sir, I'd prefer if you call me by my name, not the N-word or boy. And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, you're an N-word and you'll always be an N-word. So just do your damn job.
The paraphrasing part of that is you saying N-word instead of the actual N-word.
So right before the Civil Rights Act, when he was negotiating for the Civil Rights Act, he said, and I'm quoting Lyndon Johnson, these Negroes are getting pretty uppity these days, and that's a problem for us since they've got something now that they never had before, the political pull to go back up to their uppityness. Now we got to do something about this. We got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, but not enough to make a difference. For if we don't move at all, then their allies will line up against us, and there'll be no way of stopping them. We'll lose the filibuster, and then there's no way of putting the brake on all sorts of wild legislation. It'll be Reconstruction all over again. That's when it was the most free for blacks. This is how he was convincing people. Okay. Now, what happened with the Civil Rights Act? What happened with the Great Society? The black population were put into chains. The Great Society has harmed the black community and the black family more than anything else. Now, let's see. What are the Democrats doing now? Because they've had a change of heart. Oh, you know what? They're the ones that, just like during the time of the Klan, are arguing that black people shouldn't be able to own guns in inner cities to be able to protect themselves. Oh, they're also saying, defund the police. Who is that harming? Who is that harming most? Not harming my community, but it sure is harming the black communities. BLM, the riots. Did that help or hurt the black man? America, wake up.